That night, some in Ferguson committed acts of arson, vandalism, and theft. And by the next day, 12 commercial buildings in the city had been destroyed by fire. And let me also just point out that arson and looting, while illegal and not things that I support, and I think also counterproductive in many ways, are also not necessarily violent in that they are violence against property. And that does actually carry a legal difference, right? I mean, violence against property ought to be different than violence against bodies.
Right.
I mean, certainly harming a human being is worse than burning down a building.
Right. It should be, right?
It is.
Well, it is different than violence against a person. The penalties show that. I mean, what is she talking about? Joining us now is Joe Concha, columnist at Mediaite.com. Hello, Joe.
I'm trying to. Was that SNL or was that an actual clip, Steve?
No, that was Melissa Harris Perry. Unfortunately, it was not SNL.
I saw it. I've seen it. It's horrifying.
Yeah, I know you did. I know. Welcome aboard. I mean, you know, you talk about hyperbolic responses to the Eric Garner decision, but this was specifically to the Ferguson looting and you know, and everything else, rioting. And violence again, you know, against property and arson, and it's not necessarily violence. What on earth is she talking about? And how does MSNBC permit that?
And this is, remember, Steve, the same woman that mocked Mitt Romney last year for, and her panel did more or less, but she didn't control them, which is basically the same thing. You host a show, you know how it works. Because the Romneys actually had the audacity to adopt a black grandchild. Or at least their kids did.
Yep.
So she went on a tearful apology for that. She wants to put tampons in her ears. This is what goes for news over at 30 Rock, and this is why they're now going through, I'm sure you're not surprised by this, their worst rating stretch in 7 years. Because when you employ people like this, you lose credibility. You lose credibility, people turn away. Even liberals watch that and say, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, well, that's encouraging if that is the fact. And you wrote a great piece about Rachel Maddow, how Maddow needs to be honest with viewers and herself on her role as an MSNBC quote-unquote news anchor. Yeah,
Steve. MSNBC recently put out a promo stating that Rachel Maddow is in fact a news anchor. Now, Maddow has more influence over there than the network president Phil Griffin does. She basically decides what goes on in terms of talent. Chris Hayes got the APM show primarily because Rachel Maddow wanted it, and this promo was written undoubtedly with Rachel's approval, and it says that she is a news anchor. Now, there's a big problem with that. For starters, once on Bill Maher, she was challenged by a guy named Nick Gillespie, a good libertarian writer over at Reason.com, on a topic, and she said, look, my job isn't tell you whether I like things or not. My job is just to give you the facts. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what she said. And anybody who watches that show, you're an opinion host, right? I mean, you don't pretend to be a news anchor. You are an opinion host on Newsmax TV. You are paid because you have strong opinions on certain topics, and that's what you do. But you would never say, I'm a news anchor just giving you the facts without giving my personal commentary on it. And she is actually saying through this promo that is her job, and that's simply, obviously, not the case. The promo needs to be changed because it's intellectually dishonest.
And by the way, why, you know, I can almost understand why I don't understand why any host has so much influence unless you're Bill O'Reilly. And I guess for a while she was the Bill O'Reilly of that network. She might still be. Having said that, her numbers have, as you pointed out, have drastically dropped. And I don't know why anybody would have so much power at that place right now.
Well, no one's really doing well over there, right? So that's pretty much the problem. You've been talking a lot about Sharpton as well. He gives you no return on investment in terms of ratings, even though he's in the middle of all this. He's getting interviews with family members, but when the teleprompter isn't your friend, and that's clearly the case with Al Sharpton, and anybody who is a TV critic can say he should not be hosting a show. You want to make him a pundit, maybe, because you want to shock people, fine. It's just a mess over there, and I'm just shocked, Steve, shocked that the president, Bill Griffin, still has his job. It's like football, you know. They're like the Jets right now, or the Jaguars even. They have 1 win, 2 wins. You got to fire the coach if you're not racking up wins, and they're getting killed. I mean, they're 4th place sometimes behind HLN, and I'm not even sure that's a news network anymore. So, yeah, big problems over at 30 Rock, no question.
We got about a minute left. Talking about both sides being hyperbolic in regard to the Eric Garner decision. How so on the right?
Well, I thought that Pete King's reaction, I understand what he was saying, and Pete King not being the sports writer, but obviously the congressman.
Right,
I think when you say, you insist that, hey, if he if he couldn't talk, if he couldn't breathe. Well, you're not a medical expert, and you don't know. And he kept insisting on that line. And even some folks on the right, and I'm sorry I didn't hear your commentary on what he said, were kind of like, yo, Pete, you might want to step off, that narrative, because that sounds insensitive. I mean, the guy clearly couldn't breathe. He obviously died as a result of several factors, as you pointed out, on top of the chokehold. So I thought that reaction, and then double downing on it over and over again in different interviews after that, even though most people are saying,
right. All right, that's fair enough. Fair enough. And by the way, Joe, be careful with the chokehold description, because the grand jury might very well have decided it was not even a chokehold. We don't know. Thank you, Joe. We'll read you at Mediaite.com. Coming up next, Cheryl Atkinson, ladies and gentlemen.